Bye. And we're going to switch to Evangelos coming up next.
Hello, guys.
Brilliant.
Hello.
So that was a super quick transition. Evangelos, how are you doing today?
So, thank you, Mike, for having me here. It's quite an interesting opportunity to speak about the need for forensic investigation standardization. I think that this event serves the right purpose, since we have lots of people interested in the incident response dedicated on drones. So I hope that you find this presentation really interesting, and I really hope to make something out of it. So,
Brilliant. Well, I'll hop out of here, but I just wanted to say thanks for hopping on and good luck. We're all excited for the presentation. So your screen should pop up, and I'll back out of the studio now.
Okay. So I would like to welcome you to my presentation on this year's virtual event. The title for the presentation is The Need for Drone Forensic Investigation Standardization. So let's go for a quick background about myself. I currently work as a cybersecurity engineer at Infili Information Technologies. I'm also the author of Griffon, a research about drone forensics in data flash and telemetry logs. This research was published last year in Tokyo in the International Workshop on Security. This research was also in the use of the General Upper Staff of the Hellenic Army cyber exercises Panoptis 2019, where I got the chance to develop the drone forensic scenario. And in my free time, I serve as a peer instructor in University of Piraeus cybersecurity team, where I hope to inspire the new generation of cybersecurity experts. And also I do some security related stuff on my free time. So let's have a good look at the background. The technological advancement enables easy communication via smartphones and other devices. So we can fly small drones instead of using the big old remote controllers. So for this, we need wireless communications, and that makes drones vulnerable to various attacks if they are not properly secured. In the future, as more drones will occupy the airspace, they are probably bound to be engaged in more incidents. So we have to do something about it, right? Let's have a look at what is a drone forensically. Is it a PC? Is it a mobile or an IoT device? Well, it's a system, and hence the term unmanned aerial system. Let's have a look at the components of this system. Of course, we have the aircraft itself, the unmanned aircraft. The aircraft has some components, and the most important one of them is the autopilot. I don't know if you remember Ulf mentioned before, some autopilots can be as cheap as $50, so they can be easily acquired. And this is the big difference between a drone and a quadcopter. The drone has the autopilot. The quadcopter is just a flight board and some propellers connected to each other, and they rely on the pilot's skill. They don't control and they don't make any autonomous movement. And this is a very distinctive difference, because the drone is the one that can actually have some forensic evidence on it. And if a quadcopter, for example, crashes, we can do something about the flight board, because it doesn't store any data, just the RF signal that was sent to it and it was executed. Next, we have the ground control station. This is some software dedicated to control the drone. It can be installed on laptops, mobile phones, tablets, anything that is mobile and can be used in the field. So also we have information about the data that was during the flight of the drone stored, and we should probably look for them inside those devices. Last but not least, we have the communication data link. So all those components have to communicate with each other, and we should take into consideration actually that all those systems may contain information about the flight itself. Let's have a look at the components of the unmanned aerial system. At the center of it, we have the vehicle. And we have also a GPS connection to it, since it has to know where it flies. Now, the GPS connection is quite important because it is the it holds the most important actually information for the drone. It can direct it to some location, and we can know where it has flown. Uh, Also, we have to take into consideration that the drone has to take some commands. This can be done via RF or some mobile devices. As we can see on the bottom right on the picture, we have the manual RF transmitter and a mobile device that can actually serve as a transmitter itself if it has Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled. That device will most probably be the ground control station, since it can actually hold the telemetry data and connect to the device and to the drone, I mean, as well. Now, in the future, we're going to see the application of 5 and 4G communication on the drones. So we can use big towers and transmit data to drones so we can actually fly inside our cities. We have also, but it's beginning to become more and more important nowadays, the swarming technologies. So a drone can send communication and other signals to other drones, as mentioned before, so they can form an ad hoc network where we can also find interesting data about the flight of that whole system. Now, drones are going to become potential cyber attack targets, so let's have a look at what can happen. First of all, let's have a look at the existing threats and vulnerabilities. GPS spoofing. Since it has a really weak communication nature, mostly unencrypted, means that the information can be easily captured, modified, or injected, giving the attacker the full control of the drone. So this actually works as simple as someone transmit fake GPS coordinations at the ground control station, and the attacker has the full control of the drone before the user of the drone actually can understand what has happened. Wi-Fi and GPS jamming can also be done to hijack the drone, sending the authentication process between the access point and the device, can disrupt the flight, and also we can jam the GPS, rendering the drone useless. Now we have to note here that most commercial drones have a fail-safe option available when they become when they can't use actually the GPS, they can fly back to the home or the point that they have taken off. Some other drones have the option to continue flying, and they will do so until their battery is depleted, sorry. And also some other drones have the ability to just land on the spot. This can be configured by the user himself, but this should be taken into consideration. Now, data interference and interception through telemetry. As telemetry feeds are used by the ground control station to monitor the vehicle and transfer data, they also use open non-secure wireless protocols, which gives the ability to perform man-in-the-middle attacks and gain control of the drone itself or upload some malware. Now, what happens if the malware is injected into the drone? Like in every other computer, it can affect the operation and compromise the whole system. So now let's have a look at what can be extracted and where to find them. Of course, one of the most important findings in the forensic investigation is the GPS position of the drone. And using that, we can use to visualize the flight path. Once we have visualized the flight path, we can determine the places that were possibly affected by the drone flight. Now, imagine that you find the drone crashed near, let's say, a factory or an oil rig or something like that. You don't know what happened, so you have to find the flight path and trace back at the points that maybe were taken during the flight. This can also lead to finding out what the mission of the drone is. Because, for example, a drone that it had a spy mission, let's say, maybe would stand for a long time above a potential target. or if it drops some ordnance, we can also find it because it has to hover above that target as well. One also really important finding on the flight path is the takeoff point. It will be the first log point, and it will be the place where the drone has to take off. And if we locate that takeoff point, then we can trace back to the perpetrator in the area of interest, and we can use local sources like cameras or witnesses to identify the suspect. Also, we have to think that the firmware version can tell if the drone has been tampered with. It's really important because if the drone crashes, we have to make sure that no malware was uploaded on the firmware, or that the drone was flying the correct firmware and not an infected one. Using the firmware, we can also extract information about the types of the drone, and as I mentioned before, verify its integrity. Now, like the airplanes, and they have their own crash log. Drones themselves actually have a crash log, so we can get some information about what has happened during the flight if an error has occurred. Media. Of course, pictures and videos are quite important findings on a drone, since we can determine as well what was the mission of the drone, and also find let's say, the perpetrator himself, because sometimes they position the drones before the flight, and they position the camera towards them. This was actually one of the noted cases on the Islamic State drone operators. They used, before they actually launched the attack, they placed the drone before them, so the camera took a good picture of their face, so they can later be recognized. So we can also take that into consideration, but we can find the pilot from that medium. Now, smart batteries. They contain, of course, information about voltage consumption and battery life. Some drones also can log the serial of the battery, so it can be tied down to the owner of the drone. The autopilot logs the serial number of the drone when they are plugged in. So even though you can't find the drone, or if you find the drone with the batteries, if you take a look at the logs and you can place that specific battery at that specific location, then you can be sure that it was used at this drone. It's also quite important because drones nowadays are becoming more and more more advanced, so that type of information can also be helpful to drone forensic investigation. Now, the vehicle serial number. Of course, this applies to market drones. Since anyone can make a drone nowadays, this has to become more important. FAA section 336 actually really states that you have to log your vehicle serial number before you take off, and there's a whole process for that. The vehicle serial number logging is currently not in use in lots of countries. From my knowledge, FAA has started to make the first step towards that, and I'm quite sure that more countries will evolve from that specific thing. Now, we can also take into consideration that since someone is touching the drone to place it on the ground before taking off, we can find interesting. Although it's not relevant with cyber forensics, the law enforcement agents can be able to track down the pilot. So finding a drone that has crashed, but it's in a relatively good state, can also help track down the suspect. Now, where can we find all those information that I mentioned before? First of all, we have removable storage. Drones nowadays use SD cards to log the flight logs. And of course, if we are using a mobile phone as a supporting device, we can find the logs themselves inside those SD cards. In the internal memory chip, We can also use the chip-off technique, which is quite difficult and quite, let's say, delicate, because you don't have to damage that chip. This may not be really possible if the vehicle has been significantly damaged due to the crash. Now, I mentioned before the ground control station because right now we are using the support devices. Mobiles, tablets, laptop, and every other portable device can be used as a ground control station. So they can contain the data and the logs from the flight. We can use, of course, different acquisition techniques, since a mobile phone and a laptop have to be treated accordingly. There's a whole procedure to that. I will try not to get into that because it might be really, really technical. Of course, we can find information on cloud storage. Since drones are becoming IoT devices, it's also possible to find some of the drone logs inside a cloud storage that can be also tracked down and find the suspect. One more interesting thing here is that drones are getting their own security measures, and we have started seeing some light intrusion detection system used for drones. So we can use pickup files from that network traffic and monitor irregular activity to find, per se, a man-in-the-middle attack or uploading some malware on the drone itself. Now, let's have a look at the already existing frameworks and how they can be applied to UAS forensics. First of all, we have ISO 20037. It provides some specific guidelines for activities in handling the digital evidence: identification, collection, and acquisition, and preservation. These are the four important aspects of forensic investigation. Of course, as the guide implicitly says, it applies to digital storage media, mobile phones, personal data assistants, electronic devices, memory cards, mobile navigation systems, digital and video cameras, of course, computers with network connections, and network-based TCP, IP, and other digital protocols. Of course, devices with similar function as above can be listed, and I mean, drones can be listed as devices like that. So this is a framework that we can actually use to conduct digital forensic investigation on drones, and it also in standard, so we have a pretty good way to start with. Now, NIST SP 8086 is a guide to integrate forensics techniques into incident response. This is a guide for computer security incidents and IT troubleshootings. It presents forensics from an IT view and not a law enforcement view. This is quite important because this cannot be used as an all-inclusive step-by-step guide. They're just guidelines, not a standard that can be used into court to justify that this was the actions that were actually taken into consideration during a forensic investigation. And it informs about various technologies to perform incident response or troubleshooting. Now, NIST SP 8101 is the guidelines on mobile device forensics. Since mobile forensics are an evolving specialty in the field of digital forensics, NIST has released a revised edition of this and attempts to bridge the gap between the evolving technology and the forensically accepted procedures. So let's have a look at the tools that a drone forensic investigator has actually right now. As there is no standardized process right now, we mostly rely on scientific research, the public release of guidelines, private company research and development, and of course on our already existing knowledge. We have a lot of papers explicitly working on forensic investigation on different types of drones. They are mostly focused on promoting scientific advance and the proofs of concept. Some open source tools have been developed through this process that can facilitate the forensic investigation, such as DROP, which is the acronym for Drone Open Source Parser. We can use this tool to perform investigation on DJI logs. I think it goes up to Matrice 3000, I'm not so sure, but for sure you can use it for phantom investigations. And Griffon, which was the research that I undertook, and you can have a look at logs that were produced from an autopilot-based quadcopter or whatever, a plane, mostly drone. The important thing is that those researches mostly focus on a specific UAV type or model. So this means that the tool produced may not keep up with the continuous changes. This was one of the most important things that I found during my research, that since there is no standardized procedure, we keep on having papers on specific models and so on and on until we reach at the state-of-the-art drones that are currently on the market. We also have the release of the guidelines. As Mr. Church spoke in his earlier presentation, Interpol has released an incident response guidelines for drones last year. This is one of the first manuals that covers the full spectrum of the investigation, from the law enforcement incident responder, which is the guy that will arrive to the crime scene and take care of the drone, to the forensic examiner back on the labs. These guidelines were quite interesting in trying to establish a general framework that can apply to different drones that are currently available on the market. We have to take into consideration that the law enforcement incident response may have some procedures that are quite, let's say, that they have to be standardized. This is quite important because they apply the chain of custody protocol. So when a drone crime scene has to be taken into the responsibility of an incident responder, he has to do specific things. He has to make sure that, for example, the crime scene is not reachable to persons nearby, that is also safe for the incident responder, and it does not have some hazardous material or other radioactive probably material on the scene. So this guideline covers a really big spectrum of that investigation. Now, of course, we have the private research and development. This mostly relies on the private initiative, and they also have done quite an advanced research. Video labs, for example, have provided with a really good guide and a big data set of almost every drone available on the market, with logs and memories and images from the drone itself, so we can do our investigation and we can have, let's say, a playground and try different stuff, because they have made a quite extensively a list of drones. Their expertise, of course, can help us guide this standardization, because they have a lot of experience and lots of drones to play with, which is quite important. Of course, we rely on our already existing knowledge. We use the frameworks for computer or mobile forensics. Mostly, this means that the procedure will remain the same. What is important is that we need to integrate all the different knowledge that apply for the drone and connect the pieces of the puzzle to specifically apply for a drone investigation. Now, let's have some thoughts before we conclude this presentation. As the world becomes more and more Internet of Things focused, the need for high expertise professional becomes more highlighted. If drones are to be in our everyday lives, this means that they can also be engaged in more accidents. The role of a drone investigator, forensic investigator actually, will be something like the investigator on airplane crashes. It's quite important because lives depend on this. So we have to create a standardized practice on conducting the forensic investigation. As I mentioned before, we have to connect the piece of the puzzle of already existing knowledge and apply that to drone forensics standardization. I hope that with this presentation, we can have a Kickstarter to a much broader and much more complicated discussion that can move the industry forward And this is why I think that this conference actually gave a quite good ability to reach a broader audience that has much more knowledge, much more connection actually, and take that matter to the next level. So I have concluded my presentation. You can reach me on my email or LinkedIn, and I will be happy to discuss everything that you would like.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Evangelos. And I'm sure we can do some virtual emoji claps. So thanks for sharing. And there are a few questions that we've received. So I will ask you about those. And first thing is that I just wanted to mention was you said, using a forum like this, we could potentially continue with that standardization. Obviously, there's the Interpol document. In terms of, the standardizations you were talking about, how would people start that? Would it be contacting you? Would it be, say, a GitHub repository, maybe a working group? What did you have in mind exactly for something like that?
So since the industry has lots of experts right here, I think it would be more important to have, let's say, a working group because during a discussion, lots of stuff can come up and have a session where we can discuss about some challenges, some of the already existing procedures, try to adapt them, try to find what are the problems on them. I think it's a much more complicated thing, and this is why it has to be addressed to a wider audience that actually has the ability and wants to move the industry forward.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Brilliant. So I'll move on to some of the questions then. The first one is from Fion. If I'm saying that correctly, Fion, that says, what is the best tool to collect the telemetry data in the fastest way? Is there a way to do this for all drones agnostic, or do you have to do it per make and model?
Okay, so this is quite interesting question because you can actually collect telemetry through two ways. If you are man in the middle, where you can directly grab that telemetry, or you have to find that telemetry inside the device. So you have to take each device, let's say, if you're using an Apple, you have to apply your Apple knowledge to finding that telemetry log. If you're using an Android mobile phone, of course, you have to use a different tool. So it's not about using an all-in-one tool, but actually using the different device that makes the problem. So you have to have a specific tool for each device. For example, Autopilot and Mission Planner logs your telemetry inside your hard drive. Of course, you are going to apply your investigation and your tools to hard drives on computers. If, let's say that my mobile has a ground control station there, like Q ground control, you have to apply Android knowledge there, and it goes on and on.
Okay, brilliant. And I'll keep going down. There was another question from James that said, how much does it actually change it when you're conducting forensics on a drone that is bought secondhand or uses secondhand batteries? Funnily enough, that's something I spoke about in my initial talk, something that we've seen. So does it change it around much? You were kind of mentioning that a little bit. So maybe you can give your thoughts on that.
Okay, so if you're using smart batteries, I think this is actually a thing that if the smart batteries have been used on the first, let's say, user, and they are now second-hand, and I am the one that have bought them, of course, my drone is going to load those batteries. But I don't have the ability to find if that those batteries were used on your drone at some point, because I don't have connection to your drone. The thing about the smart battery is that you have to have the drone itself, because it's the drone that's going to actually log that information. So you have either to have a drone or access to the drone or get the information from the drone. So all of these questions actually have to be addressed at an ad hoc mode where you have to actually have some connection to the drone.
Okay, makes sense. Another one here that said, what made you actually initially write the Gryphon paper? And
So
for those of you who don't know, Gryphon was what Evangelos mentioned, but also probably the first way we connected as well, I think, when you had written that paper.
I was trying to get more involved in the drone security field, and I found that it would be quite interesting to have a tool to to do something that was not available at the time. Drop and Griffon are the only, I think that they are the only open source tool right now that you can use for DJI and Autopilot. So when I was doing a scientific research, in order for it to have some validity and some, let's say, to move the industry forward, I should do something much more broader and reach another piece of the pie, because Autopilot was not addressed at that point. And during that time, I thought it was quite important to standardize some of the procedure. Griffon is not only about extracting logs, it's also about setting up a procedure and what to look for inside the logs. So this is why also important to have a checklist on what to look on your drone.
Okay, brilliant. And this one is obviously coming from me, and let me know if we can't discuss it. But I know you had submitted a paper recently to a certain conference. Are you able to share anything publicly about that, and if people can join and watch that one, or is that more private?
It's not private actually. I will be speaking on early October on NATO's Operational and Research and Analysis Conference. The registration is open, but I think it's only until 19th of September. I don't remember actually the registration deadline. So this is the only problem with that, because it has a tight deadline to register. What I'm going to discuss is a general cybersecurity related stuff about drones, and specifically a threat assessment covering some of the stuff that Ulf mentioned in his speech as well, and using drones as an attack vector, and also conducting some, let's say, red teaming scenarios to test if the countermeasures are actually good or not. Something that Mr. Church also highlighted in his presentation, where they are going to have their own scenario, which was postponed for later, for 2021.
Very interesting. Okay, brilliant. Well, that's the last of the questions that we had received. So, Evangelos, thanks very much for taking the time to contribute and come and present. And very interesting topic. I'm sure everyone can get in touch with you at the details there. So, thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. See you.
All right. So, for everyone else, we are going to take a roughly 20-minute break.